Okay, well, I want to welcome everybody to the Artist Outlook. Tonight we have a very special guest, Mark Messersmith. His works are a visitor favorite at the Appleton. We are thrilled to have him. We have 3 of his pieces in our permanent collection, so we're very excited about that. For those of you that may not know me, I'm Patricia Tomlinson. I'm the Curator of Exhibitions at the Appleton, and we are asking that you all please mute so that we can talk and everyone can enjoy. So without further ado, let's get started. I want to introduce Mark Messersmith, very talented artist, Floridian, former FSU instructor. Mark, do you want to tell people a little bit about yourself for people who may not be completely familiar with you and your work?
Well, I know Beth's pretty familiar with me up there. I see her in the little corner up there. Where to start? It's just something I've always done. I mean, I've always made art even when I was a kid because I wasn't very good at very many other things. So, and I never really thought of it as a career or a profession. It was just something that I just kind of did. And, I think there's something to be said for that. If there's something you like doing, you do enough of it where eventually you get proficient enough at it that people start finding a use for it. So that's pretty much how I got through school, not because I was smart, just because I made lots of art that people started thinking that was, not bad stuff. And, that's certainly how I got through college, and that's kind of how I got through graduate school. And that's pretty much how I got my career at FSU. It's just about doing something that you like well enough, that you do enough of it, and you start to make some type of unique voice to that work that it doesn't get confused with other people's work. So I've been living in Florida since 1985 and never had been to Florida before that point. And it started to almost immediately affect my work because I grew up in St. Louis, Missouri, went to graduate school at Indiana University. So, there's that swath of boring Midwestness of just flat ground and nothing really very interesting there in terms of landscape or nature or animals. So it wasn't until I moved to Florida that I started to get really interested in the uniqueness of this landscape and the fact that there's still remnants of the old landscape and the old wildlife still out there, at least here in North Florida, Tallahassee, Panhandle up here. So that started to affect my work, pretty quickly at that point. I don't know where you want me to go with this. I mean, I can move into some influences or things that I've.
Well, that's actually where I was going to go next. I was going to start moving into influences. I mean, for example, were your parents artists, or did you have a fabulous teacher when you were a child? How did this all kind of start going for you?
My parents were supportive, but they really had no inside inclination, understanding of art. They were supportive of the fact that I was doing something, but, they really just didn't have a clue as to what I was doing. And neither one of them had graduated. Well, my mother graduated high school. My father enlisted in the Army in World War II, so he didn't finish high school. So I think they were always impressed that I could get through college doing art. So that gave art a little bit of credence in their vision. You can amount to something doing art. So, I was fortunate. A lot of students have different circumstances where their parents are a little less supportive of trying to become artists. I had a student once, she said her parents finally came to grips with the fact that she wanted to be a painter. And the reason they saw the light in that is because her sister decided she wanted to be a poet. So they thought, oh, well, painter is better than a poet. So it's on this little pecking order of, how much lower can you get before you're just pond scum or something down there. So I always, had that support, but really no direction or, guidance, particularly from my parents. And it's pretty much the same thing in elementary school, high school. You know, it was just a holding pond until you got some hormonal balance and they pushed you out in the real world. So we didn't really do anything with art. Wasn't until, well, this is going to be kind of boring at some point, but you know, I graduated high school right as the Vietnam War was winding down. So right at that point when a guy is graduating from high school, all the recruiters start calling you up at home saying, oh, you want to drive a tank, you want to fly a jet plane. And you know, what 18-year-old boy doesn't want to drive a tank? So my dad was terrified that I would go into the military because he'd been in all his life. So I think he was grateful that, you know, there was the option of going to college. And I started out going to community college and I wanted to be a botanist because I like plants, but then I realized I didn't like botany. I wasn't interested in Latin phylums and remembering stuff. So I just like plants. So I got out of botany and started taking some art class because I thought, oh, I always enjoy that. That'll be fun. And it was. So after that, I went 2 years to a small private college in St. Louis. Same thing, just painted. You know, I was a bad student other than the amount of work that I did in the studio. And I probably when I was in elementary, high school, I probably would have been labeled as some kind of one of those special students, you know, ones that, you know, have trouble reading, slight dyslexia maybe, but they didn't. So I was just with the herd of students, just kind of got pushed through school without any real insight to what I could probably become. So fortunately, again, that's what community college, I'm a big proponent of community colleges, junior colleges at that point. You find out who you are, what you're interested in, and then there's people there who can really specifically help you at that point. So that was probably the most important in terms of academia influences I had was, in a strange way, you know, community college.
Well, that's wonderful. And I want to circle back to the botany in a bit, because I think, well, when we have your visuals up, I think that's going to play perfectly in there. Another thing that I find very interesting about what you said is several artists that we've had on the series thus far have said, oh, you know, I've been drawing my whole life. You know, I basically came out of my mother's womb drawing, but it doesn't sound like that was the case necessarily for you. Am I correct?
You know, it's hard to say. I mean, I always enjoyed doing it, you know, but as a goofy little kid, you're drawing cars and I liked airplanes. I'm drawing airplanes and, you know, it was still in a kind of a vacuum in terms of exposure to art. I had no idea what art was. So it was just the mechanics of looking and drawing on a piece of paper and those kind of things that I enjoyed. So, you know, I really wouldn't even call it art. You know, it was just enjoyment.
So yeah, pleasurable. It was just a pleasure for you
Yeah.
to go.
Yeah, and again, it was one of the few things that I had a teacher actually say, "Oh, you're pretty good at that." You know, and I remember I was kindergartner and it was a elephant. You know, how good can a kindergartner's elephant drawing be? But somebody said I was good at that. You know, and nobody ever said I was good at anything, you know, really much before. It's not like that influenced my choice of direction, but it gave me some sort of weird little level of, you know, it is a potential, I guess.
That makes perfect sense because, as we all know, teachers can be incredibly influential in one's future life. I've had some teachers when I was in grade school that basically helped me get right where I am. So I get it. I get it. Well, would you like to take a look at some of the art? Let's get this up. Does that sound like a thing to do, Mark?
Sure.
All right, let's get this up and at 'em. Oops. There we go. So let me start with the first piece. Now, I think it's pretty obvious that when one looks at Mark's art, especially if you're not familiar with his art. At first you see very bright colors, and that sort of enters your consciousness, and then you start to look at details. And I wanted to ask you, Mark, was that intentional? Did you try to basically almost seduce people with the wonderful saturated colors that you use and then draw them in with the detail? Or give me a little insight into that.
Yeah, it's one of those chicken and egg sort of things. I don't really know which, I mean, I think that's the way I work. I don't have any deliberation, and I don't really know what's going to happen on the canvas. They just sort of start. But there is tendency for them to be colorful. And, I don't know if that's like a specific personal tendency, or, I don't think it's like a particular influence or anything like that. I think it's just, a genetic thing. I just go, oh, I guess I'll make this brighter. So it's just, it's just a preference. I do have an interest and sympathy with a lot of medieval manuscripts, books of hours and things like that. And if you look at some of those, they're incredibly ornate. They might be incredibly beautiful, bright colors. And at the same time, there might be a saint having his skin peeled off or something like that. So there is something to that seduction repulsion thing that I like. I think and again, it's not intentional. It's just something that I've gradually become aware of that happens. People do respond to the colors, and maybe they get drawn into it and they realize that the world is not a happy, colorful place all the time. So I think that's reflective of my perspective on the world, certainly in the natural world. You don't have to go very far off the road before you see things that aren't so nice anymore, or remnants of things that are left. So a lot of the format is my interest in the altarpieces and medieval manuscripts.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense. And let's go to the next one. I want to talk a little bit more about that, because we can see here, of course, that, you've got pieces below, pieces above. Let's talk a little bit about the pieces the pieces in addition to the piece that you tend to include with your art. When you make the piece initially, are you thinking of what will go with it, or is that added later? How does that all come together and gel for you?
Yeah, that's pretty much the description. It comes together and gels. I don't have a preconceived vision of the work when I start. I mean, I think that would be, just a laborious job to just try to get to some vision that you have. I mean, I sort of reference the idea of reading a spy novel or something like that. You just go through chapter by chapter trying to figure out, who the murderer is or how it's going to end. So I approach the paintings that way. I just kind of the painting starts dictating maybe time of day or color or the mood. And then I start sort of having a don't want to say dialogue, but a dialogue with the painting. And it takes a while before it kind of sinks in on me where this thing wants to go. And then you can start sort of building it up to some point that you had no idea it was going to look like that when you started. And this is kind of an interesting example, at least from my perspective. The idea of the little frozen painted little predella across the bottom, and then this little shelf, which is kind of an evolution from some of my other work that has predella shadow boxes across the bottom. So this painting's actually back here on the wall right now. So a lot of times there is you got the same brain, so you're not going to totally reinvent yourself every time you do a painting. You have to figure out, what are your tools in your brain that you can work with that you like, and then you just try and improve on those. And some of that is, again, responding to something you've already done and then not doing it again.
Okay, that makes sense. One of the reasons why I wanted to put this piece in as well is the Appleton has, as I mentioned, 3 pieces of yours, but they tend to be more scenes up in the tree canopy,
Mhm.
birds flying, in the open space of air. And I thought this one was really intriguing because it's clearly an aquatic scene. And I think it's really intriguing too how you have, the ahingas and the above the water folk and then the below the water. And it looks like Mr. Gator's about to have an ahinga lunch or something. So you want to talk about that tension that you tend to put in your pieces, sort of between, I don't want to say between worlds, but that's what's coming to mind, that sort of tension between what's going on above and below, so to speak.
I think some of that comes back as a kid, looking back when they had Encyclopedia Britannicas. You look at some of those books as a kid, and some of them even had overleafs that you would peel off, and there'd be another picture underneath it and a picture underneath that, so you could do this layer thing. And I think some of that is where these sort of levels come from, the above level, the water level, in the mud level, sort of these slices of this cake that, I'm kind of interested in recording. I don't go scuba diving, I don't go snorkeling, I don't swim with alligators. I really don't even like swimming that much. I mean, you mentioned your pool, I just soon take a shower. I mean, I'm not interested in pools, but I'm interested in animals. I'm interested in these locations. It's like I don't sit up in the top of trees either, but I like to kind of imagine what that must be like without trying to illustrate it. So in this case, it's the alligator underwater, and he's, everything is engaged in consumption, and there's no maliciousness. That alligator is not evil. The anahinga is eating a fish. The anahinga is not evil. They're just doing their sort of, jobs. And, in this substrate of earth at the bottom of the pond is all the residue of us. And it's not that, deeply buried. It's still there. So this is actually one of the ones that, in a weird way, has fewer references to human mischief, because it is buried at the bottom of the pond, than a lot of the other paintings.
Mm-hmm. And I find that very intriguing. Let's go to the next one because I want to just kind of talk about your process as well. And I'm going to circle back to kind of people and impact in a minute. So I'm really glad that you sent me this so we can include it, because I think it really speaks volumes about your process and sort of how you think these out on the canvas, how you make your vision manifest. So can you talk a little bit about how you block out your work and how this all shakes out?
Well, it varies sometimes. This one was prompted by a story that I saw online, I guess, and it was about this, braggart of a hunter. I think he was in Vermont or something like that, killed the largest bear with a bow and arrow, like he was all proud of it, and it just seemed like, doesn't take much guts to shoot a bear with a bow and arrow. I mean, it's not like the bear is shooting back or, going to run you over with its car or anything like that. I mean, the bear was just walking through the forest probably and just slowly dies from an arrow shot in him. So, something like that kind of gets under my skin, and I'll start painting with a little seed of an idea, a bear getting shot by a bow and arrow. So, I just kind of start doing some scribbles on the canvas. This is the exact same view that is in the picture up here, the same angle, strangely enough. And that's my palette table. Here is a picture of the edge of a book down here at the bottom. And, so I'll use like a reference for like what a bear face looks like or something like that. But I don't have really much more information than a real generic little seed of an idea and maybe a couple field manual references for either the bear or I think that turns out to be a blue heron up in the tree with it. So I just start making marks, and after a while, the story starts to fill in the gaps for me as I go, and it evolves and changes.
Okay. So let's move on to the finished product of this. This is the in process. This is the finish. So Jeff Malillo shot a bear, and here is the bear ostensibly that he shot. And one of the things I want to also talk about is you do understandably have a sense of, it's almost like poignancy married to outrage at how these fragile creatures are manipulated by the man-made world, whether they are being hunted, whether they are being run over by a semi, whether they are being, their habitat is completely being eradicated. Clearly, there is an environmental aspect to your work. And I think that when you mentioned botany earlier, I thought, here we go. So clearly you care deeply about the environment and our world. And can you elaborate a little bit upon that?
Well, I think you said it very well. I mean, that's pretty much the gist of it. And it's a complicated relationship with it. I mean, at some point, if I was a lobbyist or a lawyer or, working for the Nature Conservancy, I'd be channeling my energies in that direction, or my concerns in that direction. But, I make paintings, so I channel those same concerns in a different way. And it's not like I'm trying to convey a message that everybody doesn't know. I mean, everybody realizes, the sadness of the environment, whether or not they pay attention, they still know it. So I really can't change those attitudes, I don't believe. But I can paint my sadness or unsettledness with those events, and kind of as a side narrative with the paintings, as I'm working on these things, I rely a lot on kind of serendipity, something that happens that I just couldn't really ever have anticipated. So in the case of this painting with the bear, he's got some arrows in him. I don't know if you can see down here in the bottom that the little predella. Third one from the right is a little reproduction painting I did of Saint Sebastian. And the only reason I did that was because Saint Sebastian, he was killed by being shot with arrows. So he's got all these dozens of arrows in him. So after I painted that, I was researching Saint Sebastian. It turns out he's the saint of epidemics. So it was, so I was painting at the same time as the pandemic was going on. All of a sudden, here's the patron saint of epidemics that ends up being in my painting. And then in a way, it's kind of transformed into this bear. So, again, I think that's partly what art is coming up with things that you don't know before you start, something that you couldn't have anticipated before you start, and something that you try and make a little sense of after you've done it. And hopefully other people, and really, again, I can't control that, but, people wonder, well, what's Saint Sebastian doing in this painting? And they go, oh, he's got arrows in him. Well, the bear's got arrows. I wonder what other relationship I can find between this bear and Saint Sebastian. So really, it's just inviting some dialogue between the painting and the viewer. That's about all I can hope for. I can't, convince them of anything.
Okay. One thing I did want to ask you, because this image pops up in your work a lot. You have a lot of Luna moth, if you can see my cursor, those of you that are watching, imagery. You return a lot to the Luna moth. Does that have special significance for you, the Luna moth?
I think all artists have things that they like, and I really am kind of, they're magical things. I mean, if you see a Luna moth at night, I tend to see them on tennis court at night because they're attracted to the light. They're large. They're this kind of beautiful emerald green color. They don't have any mouth parts. They don't eat. They fly around for a couple days and they die. But in between is like party. All they do is look for a mate and have a good time. So you don't have to eat. You just burn yourself out, and that's it. But at the same time, there are these beautiful, delicate creatures, and that aspect I like. I like them painterly because they're green. I don't paint angels. I thought that would be fun to be a Renaissance painter where you could put an angel wherever you needed a figure in a painting. So I tend to put birds or maybe moths in those places. But I also like the fact that a lot of the moths have eye spots. So they're almost like there as judgment. They're watching us with those eye spots on their wings. So, there's compound explanations. Maybe none of them are really good, but there's maybe strength in numbers. Get enough explanations and it starts to sound like it makes sense.
Okay, well, thank you, because that imagery comes up a lot. So let's go to the next one. This one I think is really interesting as well, because I see very clearly your point being made about human beings and their impact on wildlife. You and I have chatted off scene, so to speak, about these images, these three big kind of glowing images at the top. If you could look where my cursor is. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? And then we have some flames and all kinds of kind of disturbing imagery going on where these poor creatures are not doing well in this environment.
Yeah, it's a lot to unload. Again, painting has to be a thing in itself. It's not about copying the real world. It's not about trying to paint somebody else's painting. It's not about trying to illustrate a unique narrative. Painting can be anything in the world as long as there's some consistency within that rectangle. So you're not under any obligation to paint realistic or to paint abstract. It just has to be what it is. And I think that's what the artist has to do, is to figure out what that thing is in that rectangle and find some consistency with one painting to the next within their own body work. So there's, some of the same cast of characters, the moths, the bird. I tend to paint those sort of morning glory vines growing up on the right there. I like birds, so I put a lot of birds in paintings. Florida birds. All the animals tend to be things that I've seen, so I don't paint like, I don't know, zebras or, elephants. I paint things that I've seen here in North Florida, like the moths, in this case, the pelican, the little sparrowhawk up on the top right. So they're things that I'm, familiar with having seen. And then things just happen. I mean, I couldn't give you an explanation 100% precisely why those birds and moths are on fire, and I don't know if I want to. If I did, I'd rather people say, what is that? Are they dying? Or is it some kind of flame of spirit or flame of life? They don't seem like they're particularly distressed by the flames. So, I don't know if I even know, but sometimes some paintings I'll just do that within, again, that rectangle, it's a kind of consistency. Sometimes I do the flames as a light source, as an opportunity to use some color someplace. In this case, the flames on the moths and birds, I kind of like that orange light. So it's an opportunity to play around with that at the same time.
And then these three pieces, you had told me what those are. Do you want to tell everybody what what this is up here at the top?
Yeah, they're, those nuclear cooling towers. Um, I remember driving South Florida at night, they didn't have radiation glowing out the top like that, but they always had a strange scale of menace. They were just so big and all the things I paint, I paint out of my imagination or things that I've seen, so it's not like I have pictures of cooling towers. But I paint the way I kind of think they might look. And, again, I'm not trying to illustrate in this particular case cooling towers. It's just something about these big man-made megalithic things out there spewing energy and power and, off in the background someplace. So kind of omnipresence of humans. But this is a slightly more disturbing painting, perhaps. It's got more unsettling things going on.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, and I think that ties into what we've been saying about, there is a pathos in your art, and they're, these well, maybe they're not in distress, but, to my mind, honestly, I did read it as distress. So I thought that was very interesting, and I was wanting to explore that with you a little bit. So if we go on to the next one, this is one of the pieces that we have in the Appleton Museum of Art permanent collection. We are thrilled to have it. And once again, of course, you see the beautiful mauves. This is a really intriguing piece as well. And I see a lot of symbolism in there. Do you want to touch on that a little bit, please, Mark?
This, I can't remember when, 2004, so it's been a while. Sometimes I'll look at other painters that I like, and I think it was Robert Rauschenberg. I'm not sure 100%. I think he had a phrase that, it was useful to look 40 years back in art and find something you're interested in and then springboard from that point. So this may be looking back, I don't know, 140 years to a painter named George Ennis. And, he came to Florida like in the 1880s maybe or something like that. So, I sort of like his romantic vision of the landscape of Florida at that point. So a lot of the backgrounds in some of the paintings in this one, is derived from some of those influences from some of those painters. Again, like George Ennis. So in this case, I started with these two birds, and people think they're eagles. Again, I'm not trying to be an ornithologist, but they are swallow-tailed kites. And if you know birds, you go, oh, swallow-tailed kites. If you don't know birds, you go, oh, they're eagles. I guess I'm all right with that. I'm not trying to teach you how to recognize birds, but they're one of my favorite birds. They're beautiful birds. They come up here in North Florida in the summertime. They go back down in the tropics during the wintertime. I don't know if they hang around much in Ocala, but once you see it, you go, whoa, that's a kind of special bird. They're a large raptor bird, beautiful bird. So, I paint things again that I'm interested in. So I painted these two swallowtail kites, and they're sort of fighting over, I don't know if they're, sometimes they'll be fighting over fish. In this case, I don't know what they're doing. They're messing with a stick on fire. So I don't know what that's about. Again, it just sometimes feels right when you do it. And I don't think you have to have an explanation for every single thing. It just has to fit, again, within that rectangle in some logic. If I was painting photorealistically, it probably would look goofy, but it's a finding a balance between stylistic material handling and the illusionistic narrative that the painter works with. So in this painting, it's got logging trucks, because here in North Florida, they do the tree farms. So there's the logging trucks. And I just envision these logging trucks driven by these wild-eyed crazy men driving around the dark forests at night, hauling away the trees. So I put those in the paintings, not because they're bad people. I mean, I use toilet paper and newsprint. So I'm as bad as them, but I just like the images of these, from hell looking logging trucks, flames coming out from underneath the truck and, barreling down the highways at night. And I don't know what the flaming stick is about. I mean, again, I like the idea of suggesting narratives without really illustrating them to a conclusion.
Fair enough. One thing too I wanted to point out, and this is incidentally on in our galleries on view, but it's a little hard to see. But if you can see some of the moths, you can barely see. They're actually coming out from the canvas. These are attached to wires. These different moths, and they're literally in front of the canvas. They're not a part of it. So that's another fun element with this piece. It's got a little extra 3D going on, which is fun. So if we move to another one that we own here at the Appleton Museum of Art, From a Dark Twilight. I think this is the first piece of yours I ever saw, Mark. And
Okay.
once again, it was the colors that really kind of drew me in. And then I saw, the birds and what was going on and was able to focus more on that. Now it seems, correct me if I'm wrong, and I very well may be, but it seems like your slightly older work had more shadow box type things going on here at the bottom, if those of you that can see my cursor. And then it seems like you're moving more out of that a little bit and doing the plates that we saw earlier from your 2020 pieces. Was that a conscious thing on your part, or is that just sort of a natural evolution that you just gravitated towards?
Yeah, they just, you just have to do something different once in a while. So I think one of the paintings on somewhere in here I just did, and it has the shadow boxes on it. So, sometimes I feel like just making these sculptural forms. Sometimes I feel like dealing with the shadow boxes. This one right behind me, it's got a shadow box, and instead of the shadow box being at the bottom of the painting, it's going to be, I guess, I don't know, kind of in the middle of the painting, and that white canvas beneath the bottom of the shadow box is probably going to be a couple still life images that I'm going to set up and paint. So I still do the shadow boxes back and forth.
Okay. And then we move on to the last one. This is also owned by the Appleton Museum of Art, Southern Air 2. And it was, when I first had this described to me, they said, well, it's a hawk eating, as they put it like this, it's a hawk eating a bird who's eating a gator, who's eating a frog, who's eating a dragonfly. And that sort of is what's going on here. And I'm assuming this goes back to you saying, no judgment to the animals, they're just doing what they do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's I don't really have any faults with the way the animals survive. They're just making a living out there doing that work. Usually it's the people someplace in the painting that is up to the mischief. Here there's this car hauling an alligator off on its back or on top of the car, and the animals are jumping out of the way of the car as it's going across this bridge. So a lot of the paintings deal with these ideas of forced migration of the animals, because where they live, that's been cleared for forest or a shopping mall, or, so they're being chased someplace else with the expectation that there's always someplace else for them to run to. And eventually that's not true any longer. So it is maybe me as a romantic pessimist, I guess. You can't paint a moon and rainbows without being called a romantic, which I'm okay with. But also, they're not very optimistic paintings when you start delving down into it. I mean, this one's got the clouds shaped like skulls, so, those things are always like lurking menacingly around us all the time, whether or not we choose to see them or not, you know, and it's just the way the world is, I think, at this point.
Mhm. Okay, so I'm going to go out of the PowerPoint and we'll go back to chatting some more. One of the things I did want to ask you about too, Mark, you touched on it a little bit, but it's been endlessly fascinating to me to hear from artists, not only fine visual artists, but musicians and what have you. During this time of COVID-19, when you talk to individuals about their artwork, some people were so traumatized, they basically stopped for at least for a period of time, and so they could just process. Other people, it was a time of great productivity for them. What kind of, it sounds like you've been pretty busy, is that correct? What was your response to all of this shutdown and everything that went on with COVID-19?
Um, well, like we were talking before, I mean, it's sort of a strange um, meeting of the moments for me, because the coronavirus hit, and at the same time I retired. So it was a kind of a double sort of free time all of a sudden. I didn't have to deal, you know, with the university and other faculty and solving problems, and I could just deal with my own problems, you know, in terms of painting, you know, those issues. Um, and I tend to be certainly a bit of a introvert, so I kind of enjoy, you know, being by myself working. So it's not like I'm a dancer, a musician. I need a bunch of people out there supporting what I do. I mean, I could sit in here, be perfectly content doing this stuff by myself all day long. So, you know, between that isolation from the pandemic and being retired from FSU, you know, I got lots of time to be making painting. Well, I really do three things. I paint, I work in the garden, and I play tennis. So, you know, I don't know how I had time for FSU before I retired. I don't know how I squeezed that in there. So, but I do miss talking to students like Christine. I enjoyed, and even Beth. I mean, you know, back when, you know, I enjoyed working with the students because we were talking about things that, you know, at least I was interested in, talking about their work and what they were trying to do, even if they didn't know. So I enjoyed that aspect of it. But, you know, I'll be glad when the world gets back to normal, certainly. And like I was telling you, I was lucky enough to get my vaccine today, the first dose of my vaccine today, because I'm 65. So there's some advantage to that.
Wonderful. Um, well, and I guess since you touched on teaching in school, some of you who are watching probably know we are a campus of the College of Central Florida. And one of the things that is a common question, Mark, is if you had a young painter that you were teaching, what kind of advice would you give them? How would you advise someone who wanted to do this for a professional living?
You know, it's a funny thing to put into a nutshell because there's so many variables. Um, you know, first, it's just going to be a long, hard haul. It's hard work. Doesn't mean it's not enjoyable work, but it's hard work and it's a lot of time. And there are not many other professions where it's to your advantage to emulate somebody else. You know, the worst thing you can do is emulate somebody else. So it takes a long time to figure out how to not do something like somebody else because you don't know that as a young artist. You only know what people show up and say, look, this is good. And you go, oh, I can do that. And, you know, that'll get you someplace, but you know, it takes longer to find out really who you are as an individual. And, you know, a good instructor, you know, which I always tried to be, and I think is because I had such sympathy for the process and maybe something with the mindset of, well, you're an artist because you can't be a nuclear physicist, you know, is to help students find what they're trying to find, even when they don't know. There might be a little seed of it in the work, and you go, well, this is pretty great right here, and they might go, oh, that's crap. And you go, well, no, look at it and think about it. Have you ever seen anything like that before? Or the way that was interpreted? And that's the part that can take a while, is to really realize there is no safety net in terms of how to emulate something. You have to be brave, and you have to work hard, and you just have to do a lot of it. And you're fortunate if you have another livelihood, something that doesn't take up too much of your time.
Wonderful, thank you. Well, it might be a good time to move to some questions. I see we've had quite a few of them. One individual, Danuta, asks, what are the outer objects made of? I'm assuming she's talking about the pendant pieces above and below. Are they carved wood? Are they sculpture?
I guess yes to both of those. They're just like pieces of pine that you get like at Lowe's for a bookshelf or something like that. And I'll just start drawing on it, and the painting part comes first. The canvas part comes first, and then usually if there's a shadow box, it'll come next. And then the last thing I'll do is the kind of carvings, and they obviously relate to the painting. Same character is doing something, and again, that relates back to the interest in manuscripts, the decorative border around. I've got one here somewhere. I don't know if you can see that.
Mm-hmm.
The idea of these manuscripts with these decorative borders. This one's got cicada and flowers, and you kind of wonder, what's that got to do with this old guy looking at the little baby Jesus? Who knows? But it's about their world. And those embellishments are kind of a derivative of those ideas of the borders around the books of hours and altarpieces. So they're just on panels, and I sketch them out with a pencil and saw them out with a saber saw, and then whittle them with a little utility knife, and paint them with acrylic, glue some mirrors on, put some glitter on it. And, I like folk art, particularly folk art sculpture. And, you can't have folk art without glitter and mirrors. So, there's a direct derivative of my interest in some of that stuff.
Wonderful. Another person asked, did you visit the St. Louis Art Museum when you were a child?
Yeah, it's a good question, because I think that's important. It wasn't so much as a child, because when I was really young, we grew up in Kansas City. So I remember, the obligatory grade school field trip. We went to, everybody has their brown bag with their lunch, and we climbed in the school bus and went to the, Nelson Atkins Museum, I think it was, in Kansas City, Missouri. And I remember it was really cold inside, a really big room, and the kids just stood there and screamed because they liked to hear their voices bouncing off the walls. And the only other thing I remember was the paintings were up really, really high, so nobody could really see anything. So it wasn't until I moved to St. Louis in my teens, and again, interested at the community college, to go to the St. Louis Museum, which is a great museum. It's free. There were some influential paintings for me there. And I would go there. It was a couple of blocks away from where I was going to school. And, you got familiar with the paintings. So you didn't have to kill yourself looking at the whole museum. You knew where things were, you knew what was there, and you could go and look at the ones that you were interested in. It's like going to a, I don't know, smorgasbord or something. You go, I have some more of that today because it's so tasty and you liked it so much. So, other great paintings you look at it one day, but this one, I got to go look at this painting. I got to go look at Max Beckmann's work today. So it was important to have that. And, that's one of the things that we don't have an opportunity to do at FSU. Here in Tallahassee, there is no opportunity to take your class over just to look at some really interesting paintings. So it's a really, really big shortcoming in terms of being able to educate or help educate the students. So that was a long answer when I could have just said yes.
Well, I like your long answers. I think they're good. Another individual wrote, how long does it take for you to finish one painting on average?
Oh, I'm a pretty quick painter. Um, it might take, I don't know, 3 weeks maybe for the big canvas. It takes maybe a day and a half, 2 days for the shadow boxes. It takes a day, 2 days to do the carvings. So, I almost wish I wasn't so proficient because these things are piling up. And I got 3 storage units full of paintings. They're going to museums, they're going to galleries, and still I'm making these paintings. My studio's full of paintings. I go, what am I going to do with these things? So I need to slow down, maybe. I need to take up another hobby or something like that.
More tennis?
What was that?
More tennis?
Your body can only take so much of that.
That's true. That's true. Well, you kind of led me to another question that actually I wanted to ask you. As I've mentioned several times, your work is currently on display. Your 3 pieces are on display at the Appleton Museum of Art in a show called Visions of Florida. So it's Florida artists envisioning Florida. But also, you had mentioned, well, actually, you had told someone about this talk tonight, and she emailed me quickly and said that she was going to have a show of yours. Could you tell everybody a little bit about that that's coming up as well?
It's at the Valley House Gallery next time you're in Dallas. I think it starts maybe, I don't remember the date, February, something like that. It's actually a body of work that was at the Amarillo Art Museum. So it was an easy, convenient thing for both parties. I guess, I don't know how the Amarillo Museum was going to get the work. I guess it was easy, cheaper for them to send it to Dallas than it was to bring it all the way back to Tallahassee. So from Amarillo, it's going to Dallas for a month or so. Nice gallery in Dallas. They've been there forever. Valley House Gallery. They got a nice sculpture garden. People are really nice. Cheryl's really nice. In a weird way, again, this horrible virus serves me well. I don't have to go to any of these museums for the openings or show up, so I can get the paintings out and have people look at them, and I don't have to go on an airplane any place like that.
So no big road trip or anything?
No, I'm not a very good traveler.
Okay, okay. One of the things that I wanted to ask you too, because this just sort of popped into my head as we've been chatting this evening, and I think I may know the answer, but I'm going to ask you anyway. If you, okay, let me back up. Your paintings are obviously very tied to Florida and the environment in which we all live here. Do you think if you lived somewhere else, for example, Vancouver, British Columbia, would you think you would be painting this in the same way, so orcas and whatnot? Or do you think that a lot of your creative genius is really tied to Florida and you are wedded to this place and these creatures?
I guess would the answer be yes, I guess. If I was living in the Northwest, I'd probably be painting the flora and fauna out there. Probably not much different in terms of palette, scale, stylistic thing, but the cast of characters would be different. I don't know what would happen. Again, this idea of serendipity is a kind of important to me. And I used it as an opportunity. And I had no inclination of coming to Florida ever for any particular reason. But here I am, and my paintings have pretty much are dependent now on that fact. So I don't know what would have happened if I ended up in New York City or Chicago or someplace. I can't imagine myself being an urban landscape painter. Before I moved to Florida, I was kind of doing figures and interior scenes because the landscape was, so uninspiring. So I might still be doing something like that. But again, it is that idea of chance that I think always is in your favor, in spite of maybe that being something of the unknown. And students sometimes are scared of that. You know, they want a solution. They want a formula. They want a vision of what this outcome should be. And you know, nobody should burden themselves with that kind of pressure. You just trust luck, you know, and it always ends up in your favor. If you keep pushing it, it might not be in your favor the first shot, but you try it again and you go, oh, that worked out fine.
Trust in the universe.
Yeah, pretty much.
All right.
Can't predict it, can't control it, so you gotta just trust it.
Excellent point. So what? Someone's asking about rats in New York. I'm not really sure what that's all about. Would you be painting
I've
them?
been doing rats eating pizza or something like that. They'd be having wings and they'd be on fire or something. That could be interesting.
So something to keep in mind.
Yeah, down in the, you know, bowels of the subway system or something.
Or pigeons doing something.
Survivors. You know, only thing that can survive up there. Wouldn't be me. It's a fun place to visit, but I couldn't live in a place like that, I don't think, very long.
Okay. So any other questions, anyone? Then now is your chance. We're almost out of time. So if you had any burning questions that we did not cover, now is your chance to please type it in the chat. Going once.
Those burning questions.
Burning questions. Well, it looks like we kind of covered all the bases, I think, Mark.
Okay.
So I want to thank you so very much. This has been a great pleasure to actually get to know you better and go through your art, walk through your art with you, because I agree with you. I really do think art is a dialogue. I think we as humans have a dialogue with it, and I think art pieces have dialogues with each other. So I really have enjoyed this time with you. Thank you very much.
Well, it's my pleasure. And it's nice to see some familiar faces and some new faces.
Well, I want to thank you all who are watching our Artist Outlook at the Appleton Museum of Art. This series is going to go through June, so we will have another one in February, and let me make sure I've got the date, February 18th, and it is artist Anthony Akrell. And if you are familiar with our beautiful piece, Reaper, he is the individual that painted Reaper. He works in a very classic style, the heroic male, the heroic female, very classically trained. He was trained in Italy. So it's going to be great fun. We look forward to that. And again, thank you so much. We very much appreciate your support. Thank you, and we'll see you next time. Good night.